Hello everybody, this is Zips once again from Total Gaming Network and CS Nation, and I think it's high time I offered up a review for Cities Skylines. That's right, the review embargo has finally lifted, and I can share my somewhat detailed thoughts on the latest city builder to be released. Now, first thing is first, a bit of background here. Cities Skylines is developed by Colossal Order and published by Paradox Interactive. Prior to Cities Skylines, Colossal Order created both Cities in Motion and Cities in Motion 2. Sure, those aren't full-fledged city building simulations, but it's a decent indicator that Colossal Order has some idea of what they're doing. The first thing everyone will immediately do with Cities Skylines is draw comparisons to the most recent SimCity game. You remember that one, right? The game that shipped with online-only functionality, artificially inflated population counts, bugs, and tiny cities? Yeah, that's the one. The one I stopped playing and uninstalled after my cities consistently crashed my game, and the game of any of my friends that visited my cities. Yeah, that one. Let's just get this comparison out of the way right now. How does Cities Skylines differ from SimCity in some of the key areas? First up, the cost. At launch, the base cost of SimCity was $60. Sure, you can maybe find some places that offered a discount, but the suggested retail price at launch was $60. That's standard nowadays and really isn't too shocking. However, Cities Skylines is only $30. Oh, so maybe there's a lot of content cut from Cities Skylines in comparison then? Well, no, not really. I won't say that it excels in every aspect compared to SimCity, but it certainly seems to excel in many of the core gameplay components. The things I feel matter the most for a city building experience. In SimCity, the maximum size of a single city was 4 square kilometers. In Cities, the maximum is 36 square kilometers. In fact, there's already a mod out there that increases this to 100 square kilometers. Which brings me to my next point, mods. SimCity has no official mod support. Of course, that didn't stop some people from making a few mods, but it never was officially supported. Cities Skylines has mod support built into it from the start. There are already a few mods out for the game, including one that allows for infinite money, one that allows a hard mode to be enabled, and one that unlocks all buildings from the start without the need to reach population milestones. Of course, there was the mod mentioned earlier that unlocks all buildable city regions to give you 100 square kilometers of play area. You can create and modify assets such as parks, buildings, roads, interchanges, people, and pretty much anything else. You can create your own land masses using the built-in map editor. You can add rivers, create mountains, place natural resources, and more using the fairly robust land sculpting toolset. From what I've seen, there is already a site that allows you to create a Cities Skylines map based off of a real-world map. Once you're done creating or customizing your own creations, you can then upload them to the Steam Workshop for everyone in the world to make use of. This also includes the ability to upload the save games of cities you have built up. If you're particularly proud of having a few 100,000 people living in your quaint utopia, why not share it with others to check out firsthand? The big hubbub in SimCity was their agent simulation. Remember how it was built up as this big thing where everybody in the city had day-to-day lives and how it was such a resource-intensive task? Well, it was discovered that the entire thing was a bit of a farce. Citizens went to random jobs every day and then went to random homes every night. It was also discovered that the population reported to the player was way, way higher than how many people were actually living in the city. Cities Skylines takes a more realistic approach to things. Their agents are all actually present and accounted for. Each person does have a day-to-day life. They actually have their own homes. They have their own jobs, and they stick to those homes and jobs. You can actually zoom into a person, click on them, find out their name, their exact address, and where they work. You can even rename them if you want to. You can rename their pets if you want to. You can rename businesses. You can actually rename anything in the game that has a name or that could have a name, and they actually stick around. In Cities Skylines, transportation options are far more robust than in SimCity. Both games do include options such as cars, buses, boats, airplanes, and trains. Cities also include subways, though it is unfortunate that it does not include tunnels for road traffic. The developers did say that they are considering adding them in later. Even without tunnels, the road construction offerings are more fully realized in Cities Skylines. You can use pre-built interchanges or create your own crazy designs. Right from the start, you can have overpasses, raised roads, off-ramps, curved roads, and bridges. You have a multitude of road options such as 2-lane side streets way up to 6-lane highways. Upgrade them with sound-dampening trees or barrier walls, or don't and let your citizens suffer from noise pollution. It's really up to you. In general, since the agents in City Skylines are more realistic than the ones in SimCity, traffic is far less of an issue in this game. There are fewer periods of time where people are crowding the streets at the same moment because their actions and behaviors are more randomized and aren't all leaving to go somewhere at the same time every day. A lot of the traffic issues in SimCity are essentially non-issues in City Skylines thanks to the larger city areas that you have to build on. It gives the player a lot more freedom to not feel so obligated to cram as much as they possibly can into a single tiny square. City Skylines also took cues from SimCity's RCI system. Now, for those who aren't aware, RCI stands for Residential, Commercial, and Industrial, the three main zones that you can put down in your city. In City Skylines, the model for RCI is more akin to the older SimCity titles, such as SimCity 4. In the simplest terms, having one aspect of the RCI system will generally increase the demand for the other two. If you have industry, chances are the demand for commercial will grow because industry can ship supplies and goods to commercial retailers. Thus, industry is happy. Once those retailers get the goods, they get sold to consumers, and then commercial is happy. When both of those are doing well, more services and upgrades can be purchased for the city, which then makes the residents happy. The systems in City Skylines also take things another step or two further. Once you hit a certain population milestone, you can place more specialized RCI areas. For residential, you can choose to place high-density building zones. For commercial, you can place high-density retailers. And for industry, you can choose to place offices or office building zones instead of the factory areas. Industry actually takes things a bit deeper, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. Speaking of upgrades, it is possible to buy various levels of services for your growing city. This includes a couple different sizes of healthcare facilities, police departments, and firefighting. Undoubtedly, the way these services work is very similar to SimCity. You put down a service building and are shown just how far that particular service can reach. Placing a police station on a wide main road will obviously allow for them to reach more of the side streets nearby than if they were tucked away in a corner on a 2-lane residential road. The same idea applies to things such as garbage collection or the collection of the deceased via hearses sent out from the cemetery. You need to plan accordingly. Even the best laid plans, though, still encounter some issues. A building that was literally right across the road from a fire department burned down no fewer than 2 times in a single play session on me. I could not figure out why, and still to this day have no idea why that happened. There was no traffic, I had plenty of unused trucks ready to roll out, and the coverage area was about as high as it possibly could be given the proximity to the fire station. Now, speaking of confusing game mechanics, I was more than often quite perplexed as to why I was consistently under siege by abandoned buildings. As my cities began to grow and flourish, I found that I was spending more and more of my time using a bulldozer to knock down not only burnt down buildings, but also abandoned buildings. These were abandoned industrial buildings and abandoned residential buildings more often than anything else. The exact reasons for these businesses or people up and leaving town were never really made known to me. From my understanding, citizens may be unhappy and thus leave, but I was never really clear about what it was that made them so unhappy. Perhaps a note left when I click on an abandoned building that told me what the straw was that broke the camel's back would be, quite welcome to see in this game. As it is, it's very ambiguous and left me scratching my head and wondering why, more often than not. Similarly, I saw that there was a high demand for new industry to be built. I zoned the areas accordingly and saw new factories go up almost immediately. Unfortunately, once built, they all started to complain about a lack of workers. There was no RCI demand for new residential zones to be built, but I would build them anyway just to see if it would help. It usually didn't do much. Those factories would eventually also become abandoned despite the apparent high demand for new industry. I again was not sure what I was doing wrong in situations such as that. I did not know if they needed workers that are more educated or not. I did not know if they wanted younger workers from high-density residential areas or older workers that tended to flourish in the less dense residential zones. There are a number of slightly obscure systems like this that are constantly working behind the scenes. Perhaps I just failed to give my city what they wanted because I'm simply not yet familiar with how all of these systems work. Now, despite those issues, I will give some mighty high praise to the district system in Cities Skylines. As your city grows, you may come to realize that not every area needs to abide by the same set of rules and policies. You may not want to place a blanket tax across the entire city that will really only impact the part that includes all of your factories. It's in situations like these where districts can and should be used. Simply paint an area that you want to become a district and voila! They're now a district that can have separate policies that may differ from the blanket ones set forth across the entire area. For instance, let's say you have a citywide policy in which you give out smoke detectors to everyone. Well, first off, that's quite kind of you, but it's also foolish because those cost quite a bit of money, especially if you have a lot of people living in your city. If you feel as though a particular area doesn't necessarily need them, such as an area that is right next to a large fire station, you can select that area and modify its policies separate from the rest of the city. Hell, you can even go a few steps deeper here. You can rename any district you create. You can offer up special tax breaks or incentives for businesses or industry in particular districts. When it comes to industry, you can go even deeper than that. Industry seems like one of the main reasons why districts exist in the first place. Thanks to the natural resources such as oil, forests, and even fertile land, you can decide just what type of industry will be built in a district. If you zone out a district that is right on top of fertile land, you can instruct all new industry there to specialize in farming. Once you zone for some industry in the district, you'll start to see farms popping up. The same thing for areas where oil is abundant, or trees. If you want to specialize in forestry, you can. Doing this allows your city to make some decent amounts of cash by exporting these specialized goods and resources to the outside world. They also help your city to become less dependent on outside sources for fuel or other scarce resources. Districts may seem like something you can overlook at first, but if you really want your city to grow and succeed, you will want to spend a lot of time with them to ensure you aren't letting your natural resources go to waste. As I mentioned before, it is possible to set a number of policies for your city or districts. Each one has its pros and cons, and it's up to you as to which ones you want to implement. Some will have a financial impact on your weekly income, just as some will better the lives of your citizens or businesses. At first glance, it's a very simple system, but just like with everything else, policies offer up some very deep gameplay mechanics, especially as your city continues to grow. Some hard choices will have to be made, and not everyone will be happy with what you decide to do. The same can certainly be said about taxes. You have total control over which areas are taxed more. If you see that industry is flourishing, perhaps you should globally up their tax rate to pull in more income for the city itself. Just be careful not to milk them too dry, because they will start to leave your city, which would then decrease the amount of income you pull in. Now, another hugely important area where Cities Skylines differs from its most obvious competitor is in some of the basics. First and foremost, most of the game is gated by the population of your city. This includes everything from larger facilities for things like police, health, and fire, but also things like unique buildings and tourist attractions. Of course, those aren't that out of the ordinary, but I also saw things like wider roads being gated behind population goals, which can make planning out some cities a bit annoying in the beginning. There were even some things like more efficient power or water options that I would have liked to have seen unlocked far earlier than they were. The same can be said about trash incinerators being unlocked well after I had the need for no fewer than 2 full landfills. I honestly wouldn't mind seeing some of those restrictions toned down a bit in future updates. However, it is possible to have most of these buildings and options unlocked from the start, simply by enabling the mod that does this. Just keep in mind that using the mod means no achievements will be earned while it is enabled. I'm sure many of you will be happy to hear that manually placing down water and sewage lines is now mandatory. The same can be said about placing power lines down, but to a far lesser degree. Obviously, every new zoned location needs water and electricity. It's up to you to make sure that you add new lines to adequately cover these new areas that you zoned out. It's actually super simple, but it is something you will often forget to do right after a new area is zoned out. I did sometimes find it to be nothing more than a distraction at times because there's no real penalty for having just this haphazard mesh of water lines running throughout your city. The only real penalty is the cost associated with excessive pipe laying. Power is somewhat similar in how it functions. Every power-consuming building in the game has a small power perimeter around it. If another building is built within that perimeter, that new building will extend that perimeter of power and allow for more buildings next to that one to then be powered. And, so on and so forth. With careful planning, this simply means you may never have to actually use a single power line in the game. Or at the very least, you won't have to use power lines for very long outside of the early game. You can, if you want, use power lines to connect one landmass to another landmass where a chain of powered buildings simply isn't feasible. Sadly, things aren't all perfect in Cities Skylines. There are certainly a number of features missing here that I would love to see. These aren't necessarily features that are common to the genre, but they are undoubtedly ones that fans have requested off and on throughout the years. For instance, weather. There is no weather to be found in this game. There is no snow, there is no rain. At most, you will have a nice breeze if for no other reason than to power your wind turbines. This also means that there are no holidays in this game. You won't see any increase in shoppers to your commercial districts as Christmas rolls around. You won't see more people, or any for that matter, at the beaches as things like spring break or summer vacation start to kick in. There is no New Year's fireworks display or anything of the sort. Are these things necessary to have in the game? Of course not. But would I love to see something like seasons, holidays, or even just weather included? You bet your ass I would. Though, perhaps I should start simply by asking for a day-night cycle to be included first. Yes, unfortunately it's daytime all the time in Cities Skylines. I could only assume that this was done to avoid having to deal with the simulation of the city's agents having different behaviors at night than during the day. This would probably prove to be too problematic to deal with when you crank the simulation speeds up to their maximum values. Rush hour would extend for half a day due to already compressed time found in the simulation. Another hugely missed opportunity in Cities Skylines is the fact that there are no natural disasters. I suppose this comes from the fact that there is also no weather, but the lack of natural disasters is honestly quite disappointing. The foundations seem to be in place in the game for them already though, as evident by the fact that it is possible to actually flood your own city and have the residents react to it. Yes, water in the game is actually dynamic in nature. You can raise and lower water levels in streams by placing dams, ones typically used to generate huge amounts of power for your city. The water levels behind the dam will rise slightly over time, while the level on the other side will be decreased slightly. If you build a dam next to an area with a shallow shoreline, get ready for the water to flow in and residents to complain about flooding. So yes, complaints about flooding are already included in the game. It would honestly be amazing to see things like torrential downpours or storms happen that cause localized flooding in much the same way that dams do. Or tornadoes, or earthquakes. What I'm saying is, I would love to see any sort of natural disaster added to this game. I will say that there are a couple of interesting ideas I noticed. First off, if your land values are too low, you will start to see a mass exodus of people from your city. They really don't like to put up with that kind of crap. Secondly, if you don't keep up with health, you will go through the equivalent of a zombie outbreak. What I mean here is that if you don't have enough coverage or capacity to handle the sick, they start to die. When they die, they need to be cremated or taken to the cemetery. If you don't have enough of those with enough capacity, the entire simulation starts to snowball. More people get sick from living too close to the deceased, and the situation just keeps getting worse and worse. Eventually, many of your citizens either die or abandon your city entirely. It's not quite on the level of an actual zombie outbreak in the city, but it's just as devastating when it starts to happen. Things like weather, holidays, and natural disasters are all firmly placed in the wish list side of things for Cities Skylines. Does this game need those things? No. Would it be better if it had those things? For me, the answer is a firm yes. Will we ever see those things happen? Maybe. Even if they're not officially added to the game, I hope we see something cool pop up from mod makers out there. Overall, Cities Skylines offers up the game most of us wanted to experience in 2013 and were largely let down by. I know I spent most of this review comparing it to the latest SimCity, but it's still the city builder that is most fresh in my mind, and still the franchise that most fans of the genre probably know best. So it's not really a disservice to make these types of comparisons and say that, without a doubt, pretty much everything in Cities Skylines far surpasses the best efforts made by the latest SimCity experience. They took the good ideas that game had and either built upon them, or refined them to actually work as expected within the simulation. Then they tossed in some of the great ideas from other titles, including the robust transportation options from their own Cities in Motion, and they made it all work together, and work together really well. I've only had this game for a few days and have already played it for at least 10 hours. I have no doubt that I will have added to that time between the time I'm recording this and the day that this actual review comes out. Is this game perfect? No. But even with a few bumps in the road here and there, it is still leagues better than most of the competition. I've had a great deal of fun and will continue to have a great deal of fun with this game. I'm sure if the point comes where I tire of the vanilla game experience, mods and workshop items from the community will probably be at the point where it will again feel like an entirely new experience. Priced at just $30 and offering a gameplay experience that bests games that are priced at double that, I absolutely urge fans of the genre to pick this game up immediately. Oh, and about that little social media bird on the game screen, his name is Chirpy and he's a permanent fixture. Just be glad that the feature was changed in a recent patch that allows you to disable the sound and animation for him. I will have a simplified list of the positives and negatives for the game at my website, which you can find a link to in the description below. If you're already on my site watching this video, simply scroll down a bit. As always, this has been Zips for Total Gaming Network and CS Nation. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you next time.